Good afternoon. I hope this moment reaches you in a state of peace, in a state of contentment, in a state of presence. The title of this webinar has been from me to after the webinars, both in English and in Spanish. I was born a long time ago and went to medical school, became a medical doctor, a physician. Went to Harvard to specialize in pediatrics, thinking that I needed to know every single step of the neuroscience of development in order to be a good facilitator in the healing world. Went to Colorado and became boarded in family medicine, since I thought the family was an instrumental aspect of this basic health that we are all looking forward to experience. And then, of course, became a psychiatrist, both in South America and here, and I've been practicing for 49 years this healing arts. At the beginning, I realized that something was missing in modern medicine, and I couldn't accept it so easily to know that in all traditions, in all times, in all religions, in all countries, spiritual aspects of oneself were paramount to the process of healing. And in our modern medicine, we have defined health in one level as the absence of disease, and the other level, a well-being. Physical, emotional, mental, and I would add, spiritual and community well-being, especially now for what we are living. Not content with my academic training, which led me to a few honorary PhDs besides my MD, I decided to explore what I was mentioning before, which is the healing process seen from the perspective of what we call the original people. Here we call them Native American. In other places, we still call them with the misnomer Indian. And given at what's happening racially on the planet, we have not considered their knowledge and their learnings about health and spirit as we should. So here I spent some time in the Amazons, in the jungles of Peru and Colombia. I lived with Islamic mystics known as Sufis in Northern Africa, and with Kabbalists in Jerusalem, in ashrams guided by Indian gurus, as well as my learnings with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, with whom I've had a 31-year-old ongoing relationship. That is my small story. And I use the words small story because in the larger context, what is important is the discovery of who we are. The ancient question, who am I? Where am I coming from and where am I going? The crisis of death as an opportunity to formulate these questions with depth and feel more at ease with this phenomenon that guarantee happens to all human beings. We are human beings. Now, what is a human being? First of all, a human being is a social animal which lives in the company of others and relates to others, needs others, and wants to be with others in a way such as to fulfill the lonely experience of aloneness of my I, me, myself. I, me, mine in India is called ahankar, and it is translated as pride. The me has shown to be proud for anything. If we know something, we're proud of it. And if we don't know something, we're proud that we don't know it, in a sense of distancing ourselves from those who know it. I have several anecdotes in which I've had the experience of people who don't know what a friend of mine and I are talking about and removes themselves from the conversation in the pride that I don't need to learn anything new. Human beings, individually, in this pride, look at each other and reflect each other by the color of their skin or by the nation they were born, the religion they follow, the sexual orientation they have, and constitute what we could call a small community, an I-thou relationship. And these I-thou relationships are not the true essence of who I am. They're just a false identification based on constructs of perception. And let me say what I mean by that. We live and we have a mind. And our mind imagines categories of existence and constructs them so that we can experience them. That would be a conscious mind reflection. But now, why did I call it false identification? Because by definition, identity is that which is equal to itself and only to itself. So each individual has a vital individual identity, which is different from all others and much more perennial than the identifications of what we have, of what we do, or who we believe to be in the functions, such as in this moment, speaker or doctor or listener or participant. There is a depth in the species. And here comes the importance of shifting our living identification to this identity of human being regardless of the surname, the social class, the nation, or the community we belong. Social animals, which have also another characteristic that I know of, which is being aware of being aware. Being aware that my constructs, that what I imagine to be, do, and have, are not permanent. On the contrary, they are impermanent. They change. They change through time, and they change through having exhausted the possibility of one only specific action with which we have identified ourselves, and we search. We search for this awareness of being aware, this awareness of I want to know, you want to know who you are. So one of the first commitments in the work that I offer is a commitment to being interimly identified with being a human being. There are certain mystic poets that say, you were a crystal, you were a stone, you were a vegetal, you were an animal, you're a human being, you will be an angel, and much more. Yet I want to focus on this commitment of not believing ourselves so different from each other and realizing that we are navigating together this life. For whatever reason, we exist as a we that is together. We might have opinions about others. We might have judgments about ourselves. But does not take away the realization that, number one, this human being that is speaking at this moment has certain goals and certain objectives that I can bet that are similar to you who are listening at this particular instant. I want to be happy. I want to be healthy. I want to have peace in my life. And of course, I want to have certain things where I can sleep, a roof over my head, earth under my feet, and some clothing to participate in society. We are all searching the same. We don't want to suffer. And one of the first things that come to mind is that if I don't want to suffer and you don't want to suffer, and I am a human being and you are a human being, therefore we are together, you might not want to suffer. And my responsibility is to try by all means to not be a source of suffering for you. And you can say the same for anybody else around yourselves. Human beings have a limited time on earth. One of the mysteries is that we don't know when that time is over. So my thinking has been, why not produce the shift and the change in my own self right now, since I do not know if I have tomorrow? Why not work inwardly on myself while I have this experience of life, since I have no guarantee that the continuity of this process, which might exist, and I think it exists, will or will not allow me to explore the essence of this identity, which is identical to itself and only to itself, and therefore does not need to compete with anyone nor anybody, because life, or the giver of life, or the creator of life, or the universal life has given us already this experience. Nobody creates themselves. We are creatures. We are created. We can create circumstances. We can create events. We can create togetherness. We can create war. And one of the tragic symbols of the time, I think, is that the war mentality prevails as a distancing from the other. And in this distancing from the other, ethnicity becomes more important than livelihood, and especially than right livelihood. And what we have watched over the past weeks here in the United States of America is the incompleteness of a civil war of 150 years ago or so that still distinguishes by the color of the skin the other, and sees the other in enmity as an enemy or in fear as an aggressor, and produces violence and aggression in this, and yes, I will use the word systemic racism that exists on planet Earth. Yes, it is acting out in America, but it exists in South America, it exists in Europe, it exists within Africa, it exists in Southeast Asia, it exists with the Maoris in New Zealand and with the Aboriginals in Australia. The conquer white mind has decided that it is better, and therefore The pandemic of racism has taken over the world, and it is time to see what is just and dignified and change. Because if we relate to ourselves as human beings, an African American, an Asian American, a South American, a Latino as they call them, is only different in some customs, only different in the color of the skin, and maybe accustomed to the suppression that has prevailed for too long. Therefore, in order to experience that first commitment of being a human being, we need peace. And I'm not talking about tranquility or sedation. I am talking about a state of consciousness that allows us to be grateful and content for the fact that we woke up again today. I woke up again today, and that is plenty. Problems come, problems go. People come, people go. And yet, at the core of ourselves, what is required, in my humble opinion, is a shift of residence for our identity. A shift of residence so that the most holy of holies of experiences, which is being, is valued in sanctity. We have overlooked the crisis of the coronavirus, and people are beginning to break the rules of mitigation and distancing, and the curves are beginning to go up again because we have not conquered the virulence of this force field, of this virus, in such a way that we can say we are free to hug, to travel together, to go places, and to visit each other as this social animal, the human being, so deeply needs. We have seen high number of people falling into anxiety and depression because of the isolation. And I've had the personal experience of talking to many of those who at this moment, whereas before they took for granted living alone and being so-called independent, the absence of the presence of the other, the absence of relating, has caused grievous mental pain. We need each other. We are a we that functions better in community. Even though great discoveries have been done by individual people, the implementation is always communal. And how we read this transition to a we-ness in the next years, let me be generous with numbers. I would much rather say next hours or days, but in the next years, will depend the way we live on this planet for the next thousands of years. Because we cannot continue this way. The pandemic of the coronavirus hopefully will pass. The pandemic will find a remedy and hopefully a vaccine in due time. We cannot accelerate the times of research and testing. We cannot accelerate the times of experimentation. But we know that there is a track, a direction, a way in which we can solve that problem. But the third crisis that we're going through is the climate crisis. And this climate crisis puts us at the verge of extinction. Not because of racial injustice, not because of the coronavirus, but because this human organism is equipped to function within certain parameters, and our actions have violated the temperatures of the planet, the quality of the water and the quality of the air, and led us to a type of living which is neither radiant nor happy, but polluted and suppressed. The absence of we-ness, so to speak, leads us also to an unsurmountable amount of fear, which takes the most brilliant minds of research into ways to discover defending ourselves through weaponry. And I believe that the budget on planet Earth, no matter if we call it a developed country or a non-developed country, that reflects our anxiety to defend ourselves and manifests itself in weapons of mass destruction worldwide, is also a result of an erratic identification with what we are not. We are not just members of a club or members of a nation or members of a political ideology. We are human beings. And these human beings have certain necessities. Yes, I mentioned before that food, shelter, and clothing are necessities. But let me add in this moment the necessity of awakening, the awakening of consciousness, the discovery of what is a context and not just a construct. If we would renounce our problems and would renounce our so-called achievements, there would be nothing else in the depth of our mind but cosmic consciousness. We will discover that with the energy of this life, we create things and then get stuck in the identification of these things, positions, and call them identifications. Let me, at this moment, invite you to a retreat, not on the web or on Zoom or on YouTube, but physically here in Southern California, in Vista, California, in 5 or 6 weeks, the 23rd of July, in which we will come together to explore the inward steps of meditation and the inward steps of rationalization that we need to do and undo respectively in order to get to that goal, which is the contentment of what we have in life and setting straight in a loud and clear voice that which is not functioning for others. Because killing a black man with a knee of a policeman defeats serve and protect. And this can't continue taking place here and nowhere else, because that's not the purpose of the function for which this police has been employed. It is an abuse of strength and power. It is a negligence of the respect for the appearance of another. It is not fair that our police is armed to their teeth and weaponized as a military against ourselves. Yes, there is some need of policing crime, but no crime was committed in the case of Floyd. The only crime was the color of his skin. And as a white man, it's intolerable. And I can only feel with compassion and empathy how much more this is for those who call themselves members of the African American community. how much more destruction to justify a false ego, which doesn't know what to do with itself in peace and quiet, and becomes nervous and begins to create circumstances and situations to occupy itself that have nothing to do with the purpose of human life, which is self-expression, health, and happiness, which is love, care, and responsibility. So there are necessities for this social animal called the human being to study, to explore, to learn, to cultivate, to refine, to meditate, to absorb, and to grow in levels of consciousness which are non-sociological and not psychosocial. But there are, for lack of a better word, known as spiritual inner values. Unfortunately, our schools produce a lot of people who know some things about some things, but they sit in the ignorance of the cause of suffering. Ignorance of what? Of more subjects? No, my friend. Ignorance of the nature of reality. Ignorance of knowing who and what we are, and ignorance of the appreciation that we have the power to create with this energy something which is for the highest good of all and the betterment of life on this planet. Not weapons of mass destruction, not constant defense and separation, but health and education of the higher states of man and woman, of human beings. So we are one humanity, split up in factions forever. For as long as there is recorded history, there are these subpersonalities which believe that that's who and what they are. And in these subpersonalities, the creation of feelings appear, but not the creation of selves feelings of growth and understanding of our position of Earth in the cosmos. But this ignorance produces negative emotions, emotions that come from a fundamental lack of self-value, which leads to a lack of self-esteem, which leads to constructs that in order to be valued, you and I need to invent. Invent money, invent power, invent prestige, invent jobs that long have forgotten the true purpose of why a human being learns to function as a social animal in the company of others. The nature of reality. What is real? What is true? What is permanent and what is impermanent? Since we try to make permanent circumstances that, if we're honest, we know from the start there are impermanent. Jobs, some relationships, aspects of ourselves which change every time we look in the mirror. And this nature of reality, which in its essence, as quantum physics has declared it from a mathematical perspective, is the void, is emptiness, it's space. There is more space between certain areas of an atom than we can imagine. Space is what we are. And our equipment, our brain, is destined to produce more emptiness and more void in order to be able to learn where we stand, where we sit, where we go, what we do, who we are, how we move, what we want, what we don't want, what we want for others, what we want for ourselves, for what we want for the human race, what we want for the planet Earth. If the base of our knowledge is the knowledge that I was telling you before of Harvard, yes, it gave me some idea of specialization. But what I really learned about myself was with people who had not academic training in their background, but they knew how to live, whether they were adherent to a philosophy or a faith that created the context for them to pray and meditate, or whether they were what we call indigenous, one with the land in which they were living, and me with my 6.3 feet running after them and not being to hold the pace to run in the jungle barefoot because of my own limitation and training. And yet I learned something. I learned space. And for me, the most important thing is the cultivation of this empty space from where situations arise, construct themselves, and disappear. And as I mentioned before, we want to make them permanent. We want this relationship to last forever. We want this job to last forever. We want this honor to last forever. And yet, experience shows us that they rise, they ebb, and they flow. They ebb and they flow. They come and they go. And if our young people would be taught about the nature of impermanence, I recommend my book, Recovery of the Sacred, as a description of that. And look at what is really permanent behind these cycles of impermanence. We know that one permanent thing that happens is that people die, and we better prepare ourselves, as the Tibetans say, to cross that threshold, that bardo, without so much surprise, and similar to how we crossed our birth canal coming from our mother. Even though modern psychologists think that there is no memory, we know that there is memory of early events and past lives, which determine certain modus operandi for this individual to create the constructs that will allow me and you to surpass them. Like these weeks of marches are not just some erratic energy manifestation, but they have a reason, a purpose, and a meaning, which is to say, stop to an unjust form of perception. Stop to a construct that, coming from this impermanence, has tried to make it forever so. And making it forever so is true pathology, is being stuck in a present time which no longer exists. Not saying that it should have existed at some point. The misperception has no schedule and no time. The misperception is one of the chronic phenomenon of an ignorant human mind. There was a man called Nikolai of Cusa, at the end of the 15th century, who wrote a book that he calls Docta Ignorantia, the ignorance of the doctorates. And this ignorance shows a specialization and a holding on without the contemplation of the evolutionary process of man, which will be also working in the retreat of July, which starts for every individual with food, with survival, with the need of belonging, the inclusion of states of awareness of the child who looked for security in mother and father and then projected to institutions and leaders, and the progressive evolution through modern times into contemporary life and into a future which I believe needs to be holistic. And holistic means one field, one aura, one halos, one greenness, since the word halos also means in Greek green, one vigor, one growth that includes us all. So I sincerely hope that there are some questions which I am looking to answer if it so were. And to a following webinar in Spanish within 2 weeks, this time all in order to invite you to participate physically and bring your body, mind, soul, spirit, environment here to California for 4 days. Give me 4 days, and I promise you, you will experience the transformation in the ability in which you live. You will have a context that you maybe never had before because you've been attached to one belief system or to another, one false identification or another, one talent or another, or one conflict, and have lived trying to surmount the effects of these adjectives. Life is short. I remember when I set myself out on this path, towards the end of my years of medical school. And since my questions were apparently not the appropriate one for my professors, which were surgeons, and I was told that I was a metaphysician without me even knowing what that meant, and a mystic without even understanding why I was being called that way when I was asking for the nature of biology, the root of living. I thank them for having closed the doors on answers which led nowhere, and that I firmly embarked as my first priority for the realization of that which we are, that which you are, that which I am. And it is in this context that I want to insist and invite you to this live retreat on the 23rd of July. We postponed it once for the obvious reasons, and we're not postponing it this time. There are many participants already registered to it, and I want to open those doors so that we can experience, not in theory, not in words, not in a webinar, but in our own inner awareness, what I've been talking about. May you be blessed, and that means spoken well. May you not be gossiped, and that means not spoken well. May you reach happiness and accept the reality you're in as a baseline and not as a destination, but as a beginning point every day in the freshness of meditation for an evolution that I have found no end to it. Thank you very much for being here today. I have invited you to the inside of my home, and I am inviting you for this retreat to the inside of my home. I suggest, as a daily practice, since somebody asked that question, to become a true believer in what we have experienced, so that we don't take a step up and then a step down and a step up and a step down. But we own our learning. We own our experience. And we start the day with that practice of gratitude and knowledge that this was the maximum we got to yesterday and the minimum we are today. So we are eternal learners. So we're forever students. So we can continue in what a creator or a universal mind, however you want to call it, a process of wholeness is willing to teach us in this human form, so that we can eliminate death, decay, and degradation from our thinking and feeling, and live in the only place that there are no problems. Now there is no problem. Now we are in a conversation. Now we are connecting. Usually we bring anxieties of how things are going to turn out and shadow our presence. Or we bring memories of the past and shadow our essence. All of this and more we will be working with. Because what we work is not with a theme that I bring. The theme that I bring is being. But you bring contents, constructs, way of seeing that have not geared you towards joy and happiness, or if they have crystallized. And self-actualization is exactly the opposite, is progressing from crystallization into constant growth and actualization. And if there are no other questions, I wish you a happy rest of the day. We'll see you soon in 2 weeks in a Spanish webinar and in a month here.